Okay.
Go after that.
Yeah. I woke up this morning and I had an email from my husband at like 5 a.m. saying, "Oh, I forgot to tell you." You always love to read that first thing in the morning. "Oh, I forgot to tell you, I will be at the Abyssinia Baptist Church in Harlem this morning. I'll check in afterwards." And no, he wasn't singing. He was actually just there as a guest of the minister. And that church has been around since the 1800s and has over 5,000 members every Sunday. And so he called me after the service, and he said, "You know, I know you keep saying it. I know you keep saying it, but we're all saying the same thing." He said, "But I do want you to share something with the congregation." It's this morning, he said, because he said something, a little sentence that just blew me away. He said, "You don't have to be sick to get better." And so I said to him, I said, "Well, of course I'll share that, because it's kind of what I want to talk about today." And Mary, thank you for what you said when you got up here. And AJ, thank you so much for that song. You know, we don't do what would be considered Christian music very often. In fact, never. We really don't very often. And yet, where we're going as a community must include this type of music. I mean, it just has to. For us to forget where we came from is one issue. But for us to forget that where we came from is still as valid as the day we got here, that's the even more important issue. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So let me start with the idea of holy ground, which was mentioned twice in the Bible. Once in the Old Testament and once in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it's brought up because, of course, God met Moses in Mount Sinai, and that was considered holy ground. That was the holy ground that the Old Testament talked about, where God met Moses and where Moses gave God the commandments. You know, how much of that we ascribe to, it is not important. What the commandments mean is far more important. And they certainly do make logical sense, don't they? Whether they were given to God through Moses through a burning bush, or whether Moses understood what needed to be said to his people at the time. I will tell you a little joke I heard recently about the Moses and the burning bush. Moses was up on the mountain, and he'd come down many, many times, and every time he came down, his people said, "Get back up there. They have to be smaller, shorter," because they were started like 3,000 commandments. And finally, Moses came down and he said, "You know what? This is it, God's last point." He said, "God has no more deals for us. So I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is it's down to 10. The bad news is adultery is still one of them." So, I asked my daughter this morning when she woke up, I said, "Could you tell me what you think of as holy ground?" She looked at me, she went, "Sure, it's where Jesus walked." Now, Nora has not been brought up in anything other than religious science, so she picked that up somewhere here, or somewhere. And I said, "Okay, where Jesus walked." And she said, "But the problem for me is I don't really get the Jesus thing." I said, "Okay, what don't you get about it?" She said, "Well, I just don't get that he was the only Son of God." She said, "Because if he's the only Son of God," she said, "who am I?" And I was like, "You got it, you're good." And she said, "But if we all believe that holy ground is where Jesus walked, and if Jesus was the Son of God, but if so am I, then isn't the holy ground where I walk too?" And I said, "Yes, it is." So, going back to the Old Testament for a moment. In the Old Testament, the idea of holy ground really was a very sacred place. Now, when you would go into a temple or a synagogue or a mosque, wherever, a holy place, a church, you would be asked in the Old Testament to take off your shoes because in reverence for the holy ground you were about to walk upon. And very often, when Moses went up to receive the commandments, he also covered his face in a sign of unworthiness, in a sign of being unworthy to what was coming to him. So The synagogue, the temples, even today, when we were in Rome, when we got to Rome and we went to see the Pope. We didn't see the Pope, but we went to the Vatican. And we went into to St. Peter's. I was wearing a hat. A little hat. Not a big hat, but a little hat. And our guide said to me, you need to take your hat off. Well, I knew I was going to have hat hair if I took my hat off. It was also very hot that day, and I was just schwitzing everywhere. And I turned to him, I said, no, I'm not taking my hat off. And he says, no, you really have to. And I looked around, a lot of people had their hats on. And I was like, I am not taking my hat off. I said, you cannot force me, and I'm getting all political, you cannot force me to take my hat off. And Kevin turned to me and he said, you know, if you took your hat off, maybe it's just in reverence. I said, but if I took my hat off, I would have to believe I was about to be in reverence to something that I am not. To which, of course, everyone in our group was like, absolute, and they grabbed hats and put them on. Just in solidarity. But I've had a lot of thought about that since. And today, I might take my hat off. Not because I would feel separate, but just because perhaps taking my hat off now would give me the feeling of stepping up into a higher consciousness. Taking my shoes off, perhaps, would allow me to feel like I'm stepping into a higher consciousness. Stripping everything away, perhaps, might allow me to feel that I'm stepping into a higher consciousness. So I'm here today to just make amends to that tour guide who had my wrath that day. So today, when we go into churches and such, how many people still love to visit churches when they're traveling? I just love. Even just recently when I was in New York, I went into St. Patrick's. I just love to step into these places. And don't we have the consciousness, don't we have the feeling that we've stepped into some sacred place? It just has this feeling. You don't feel that way? Not yet. Okay. You may never, and that's fine too. We'll talk. But I just get that feeling when I walk in. It's just like I can feel. But you know what we're feeling when we step into those places? Just to be really clear. Consciousness, Lynn Wask. Consciousness. That's all. We are feeling the remnants left over from everyone else who stepped in there, took their hat off, and stepped up in consciousness. And so the collective consciousness of that space has an energy to it, doesn't it? It has to. That's why those places are so sacred, why they feel so amazing. So in the New Testament, it was also talked about, this idea of holy ground. And it was Stephen the Apostle who brought it up. And Stephen the Apostle is considered the first martyr. And Stephen was stoned to death for being obnoxious. Really, that's what they wrote in the wherever I read this. That he was stoned to death for being obnoxious. I thought, oh my God, so many people would be dying today. If only we could go back to that practice. What? No. Could you imagine? So St. Stephen was stoned to death. Now, the idea was, though, that he was obnoxious because he would not stop talking about Jesus. Right? And I thought to myself as I read it, I went, I could clearly be stoned to death today because I will not stop talking about that you are God and I am God. And I just had this feeling if I lived back then, I wouldn't be around too long. I wouldn't, because that's how I feel. I feel just the way he felt. I imagine he felt, that he just had to let everyone know about Jesus. I just have to let everyone know that right where they are, God is. That's the truth of their life. It has to be the truth of their life. It's the truth of my life. So St. Stephen brought up this idea, and he said that it is not the place that makes it holy, it is the presence of God that does so. Now, the problem was that we thought that the presence of God was something specific to something else, not to ourselves. So I want to go into some Ernest Holmes for you. Ernest Holmes wrote this: people are more interested in God than they are in religion, because religion has been more or less mixed up with superstition, theology, and ecclesiasticism. Now, what Ernest Holmes was saying was true. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are even not interested in God anymore, because how many people here have an issue with the word God itself? Great, because you've been coming here and I beat it out of you. So, no, but the truth is, I have a lot of people in my classes that just can't deal with the word God anymore. And now I have a lot of people in my classes that can't deal with that because I teach people all over the world because I'm so into the teaching online and teaching by telecommunication. And so I have people all over the world. And I get emails saying, every time you say God, you stab me in the heart. I just want you to not speak of God. But I continue to speak of God to try to get our understanding back on what that means. So Ernest Holmes is saying that we've let religion stop us from understanding this thing about holy ground. He goes on to say, when we use the word God or spirit, we do not mean a tribal God, but the supreme mind and power back of all created form, the intelligence which responds to us. The intelligence which rises through the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms and blossoms in the human mind as it approaches the consciousness recognition that it is one with the oversoul. And for those of you who don't know, the oversoul is an Emerson word, really, is an Emerson idea. The oversoul meaning the consciousness, the highest level of consciousness. And then he goes on to say, the nature of man's being is God. Your nature. You are by nature God. Nothing else. What you do with that is just your story. How many of you have stories? How many of you are still attached to those stories? I can hear some of you going, he's here to depress us today. I totally get it. No, but we do. We become attached to these stories, and we start believing we are our stories. And they become what's real in our life, as opposed to being attached to our very nature. And that's really what Ernest Holmes came to say. And I'm teaching a Troward class right now, which has literally turned me on my ear. It has literally reached into me and just opened me wide up. I joked about it last week that it takes me at least 2 hours to do a 20-minute presentation on the teleconference. And it does, and sometimes it takes me 3 hours. And most of the time, it takes me as long as it takes me and then doesn't let go of me until I pick that book up again and have to move on to the next 20 minutes. And I said jokingly on the call recently, I said, we really shouldn't be the church of Ernest Holmes' teaching. We should be the church of Thomas Troward's teaching. Because basically everything Thomas Troward taught, Ernest Holmes picked up and rewrote it for a generation that couldn't really understand Thomas Troward. And those of you who are sitting here saying, oh God, I hate Troward, he's so deep. No, he's not. Yes, he is. He's very deep, but he's not confusing. Certainly not the way I'm distilling him at the moment. And this idea, here's where I get to. Troward, his whole teaching is about getting us to understand that right where I am, God is. Troward makes no bones about it. And people who would log in to look at this are going to think I'm being a heretic for Ernest Holmes. But Ernest Holmes backpedaled it. He really did. He stepped back from it. And I know why he stepped back from it. He stepped back from it because who was really going to believe it in 1950, or 1926, or 1920? Who was really going to believe that I am God? That was heresy. And frankly, even today, people have a very hard time with it, and I know there's probably some of you sitting here who still have a hard time with this concept. But here's the deal. You go back to Thomas Troward, who predates Ernest Holmes, and that's what he was saying, which is why no one knows who he is except us. Because that's what he was saying, and Ernest Holmes found a way to distill it and teach it that made sense to people and started to build the bridge. You know how I always say, I really don't want to be the bridge. I don't want to be this side of the bridge or the middle of the bridge. I want to be on the other side of the bridge. And then anyone who cares to cross the bridge can join me. Well, that's kind of how I feel. And I believe they're brilliant ministers. Kevin was at one this morning. And Michael Beckwith is one of those brilliant ministers who is on the bridge, leading people over it, I believe. And I do believe there's going to come a day when we're all going to go over that bridge, and we're actually going to step into that place where we somehow instantly know who we are. And that's when life will absolutely transform. When the universe, when the world knows that it is God, thank you, everything will have to change. So, here's what he says. Ernest Holmes says, when people say that they are not interested in a new religion, be sure to explain to them that you are not offering them a new religion. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? as we all talk about our religion. So, when people say they're not interested in your new religion, be sure to explain to them that you are not offering them a new religion. Ernest Holmes was not offering us a new religion. You are merely seeking to give them an interpretation of life. Period. End of sentence. He says, the science of mind does not necessarily create a new religion or sect, for it may be added to any spiritual system of thought, since it is a complement to all of them. I don't know that we've ever read that from a stage. Yeah, well, that's what he said. And I find myself in a very interesting position in my life right now, because it's where I am. I'm not interested in the religion science of mind or religious science. I'm interested in what this teaching can do to bring all religions together. And not meaning that they all have to become one religion either. I don't think the Baptists in Harlem need to join our religion. But I do think it'll be a nice day when the Baptists in Harlem and the religious scientists in Los Angeles and the Muslims in Afghanistan all recognize that there's one truth holding us all together. And I really think that's what Ernest Holmes came here to teach. And so that really brings me to Memorial Day, doesn't it? It really does. It brings me to celebrating all the people who gave their lives over, not in honor of war, but in honor of peace. All the men and women who gave their lives in order to stand for something that we mistakenly thought war could fix, and that we still mistakenly think that war can fix, all the way from the first war that ever happened to Afghanistan. And we are still learning that it will never fix anything. Oh, it may fix it for a moment when one power realizes there's another power bigger than it, and it gives up until it grows bigger and then thinks it's bigger again and we're back at it. That'll just continue to happen until we actually get there's only one power. And we're all it. So, the science of mind, what we teach, what we believe, what we study, is really here to bring the world together in one place at one time. That would mean that we could respect, honor, appreciate all walks of life and still have a perspective that all of these walks of life can be experienced by all of us. How many people in the room have ever chanted a Buddhist chant? Okay, I've experienced that. Beautiful, breathtaking. How many of us have started out as Catholics? Have you ever been to a Catholic church lately? Probably not. Well, you know what? There's some beauty to be found there. There is. And there may be things you don't agree with. Oh, well, that's okay. How many of you grew up as in the Jewish tradition? Great. When was the last time you were at a temple? Well, it's next week. No one's going to be here. You're all going to be other churches. And that would be okay. To me, the board of directors, they'd be a little upset about it. I mean, that's really what we have to celebrate here today on Memorial Day. So the idea is re-understanding this idea of holy ground. So let me just start with standing on holy ground. My daughter really got it perfectly correct. Don't think you have to go anywhere to be standing on holy ground. Don't think you have to change anything for the ground you're standing on to be holy. Because if the holy ground stands for that place where God is, how could there ever be a place where God isn't? Now, what do you think the world would be like if we all managed somehow to treat every place we were as holy ground? And what do you think the world would be like if everyone did that? That no matter where we go, we're standing on holy ground. And here's it, no matter who we're with, they're standing on holy ground too. Because sometimes it's easy for me to stand on holy ground, but there are certain people that I really question if that's holy. And sometimes I wish it was holy. They could just disappear right under it. And yet, it just comes out of me. I don't even think about it. It just comes up. Holy ground. I'm telling you, there is a lesson in this understanding of holy ground that could transform the universe if actually everybody took it and believed it. So the other one, standing in his presence. Because there's a lot of duality in that song if you listen to it from the songs, from a Christian sensibility, from an old Christian sensibility that you may have had. Oh, how many people knew that song? I could hear some people humming it, singing it from maybe their background. When it says standing in his presence, first of all, it's an old tradition that God is a him, H-I-M. It's not. God is you, God is me. But I do think we have to sometimes become conscious, fully conscious and awake to the fact that I'm standing on holy ground. We have to become conscious and awake to the fact that I am God. I am the presence. So if I am the presence, I must always be standing in the presence, yes? Yes. And that means no matter where I go, no matter what I do, I am standing in the presence of God. Now, I would like to add this. No matter where I go, no matter what I do, I am standing in the presence of God. Act accordingly. How often do you act inappropriately to where you really are? I think we do, and I think it's just because we forget. Next line is, let us praise God now. There was a point in the song when AJ was singing where, and I bet you all had this to one degree or another, my heart just started to get so full that I felt like just so expanded by what you were doing and your beautiful voice and your presence and your commitment to what you were singing, where I just naturally felt Rita Andriello's hand and mine grab one another and squeeze. And let us praise God now. I think we've lost a lot of our traditions because we've become so disenchanted with the religion itself. But I think we need a lot more praising of God. And that means praising of that within me that is the divine. And praising of that within Rita that is the divine, and Mary and every single person in this room. That's what it means to praise God. And I think we would do ourselves a great service if we went back to understanding that it is very positive and a very fulfilling experience to praise that which is within us. And certainly to praise one another. And then it says, in his presence there is joy beyond all measure. In his presence, peace of mind can be found. Whenever we have a need, he is the answer. And then the line, reach out and claim it. So, duality is a thing that is so easy to fall into. It really is. It's so easy to suddenly find ourselves separate from something, from God. And yet, when we go to this place of in its presence, as the presence of God, I am peaceful. As the presence of God, I am wealthy, rich beyond all imagination. As the presence of God, I am healthful. I don't have to be sick to get better. I don't have to go anywhere and experience anything that I don't want to experience in order to continue to grow. I don't have to fall into the dark valley of danger and what are those things called? The blackout, what is it? The black hole of disgusting times. I don't have to go anywhere near that stuff in order to know the other side of it. Right? Do you? How many of you are in some place like that right now? Don't raise your hands. You don't have to give yourselves up. But how many times when you get there, all of a sudden it feels good? I was thinking the other day about, I wanted to go out and do something. I thought, I don't really have time. And then I thought about, do you remember, James, when you were laying in your bed and you're only in the middle of cancer, only just couldn't wait for that moment when I could stand up again, when I could get out of bed and not be dizzy. And I don't mean the kind of dizziness I normally have. I mean the dizzy, like the physical dizzy. I remember, and I went back to that, and I thought, why do we have to get so damaged before we start realizing how great we are? Why do we have to take ourselves so low so that the good doesn't have to be that high? Think about that. If I get myself really damaged, then good is just a step away. It's not so hard to get there. You don't have to be sick to get better. You can be in the most incredible moment of your life, and there's more to have. There's more to be. There's more to experience. For We are standing on holy ground. The whole idea today is that I am not just standing on holy ground. I am the holy ground. You are the holy ground, and you take it everywhere you go. You don't have to go find it, but you are responsible for taking it with you. And the only time you are not on holy ground is when you mistakenly buy into the idea that for some reason you're not. That doesn't make it so, by the way. But it does make it so for you when that happens. So I just want to say thank you to AJ for bringing this song and for bringing your voice and for giving us an understanding today. You know, Kevin and I talked this morning. He said, what are you going to say about Memorial Day? I said, well, I'm actually looking to wrap it all up into one thing because I don't think I've ever spoken on a Memorial Sunday, on the Sunday Memorial Day weekend, and really talked about war or Memorial Day. And yet, all of a sudden, it all made sense to me because it's all one thing. I spent this whole week working on our new website. We're about to step into our new name, the Global Truth Center. It's not surprising to me that as soon as you decide something, everything in the world surrounds you with itself. So if we're really going to be the Global Truth Center, then we have to be willing to really reach out and reach in. We have to be willing to embrace everyone and everything. Now, does that mean that we're not going to have a set of principles that we live by? No, it doesn't. But here's what it does mean. It means we are going to always, always, always be open at the top. As Ernest Holmes said, be willing to know more, be willing to be more. Reverend Rita said something so beautiful to me today. She said, she was talking about the ancient wisdom. She wrote it on her blog today. And it was talking about ancient wisdom, that we can find everything we ever need in ancient wisdom. But Rita so brilliantly said, she said, but here's the thing about ancient wisdom. That was thought up by people too. So if ancient wisdom is what the ancient people thought at that time, and if new thought is what the people now think at this time in our movement, what makes them different? Why are they different? Well, maybe you're different than your ancient ancestors, and maybe you're not. The fact is, right here, each and every one of us has something so precious, so brilliant to use, that it transcends wisdom of any kind. What do you think that is? Consciousness. Thank you. Consciousness. Your mind. My mind. And there is something, exactly. There is something right there at the center of your mind that transcends everything that we're talking about here this morning. It allows you to agree with it, disagree with it. Allows you to expand upon it, allows you to argue it. That, my dear friends, that is where the holy ground is. Nowhere else. Right there in Isaac's mind, right there in your mind, is where holy ground lives, breathes, has its beingness. So holy ground is not only something that you arrive at, stand on, live in, it's something you use. So this Sunday, today, as we get really clear on what this thing is, I think we can commit to, and I know I do, we can commit to using it more consciously. And never allowing ourselves to get to any place whatsoever where we are going to stand and somehow diss ourselves into disassociating ourselves from holy ground. Or disassociating ourselves from being this presence of God that we are right here and right now. We are standing on holy ground. And it is not only a good thing, it's not only an intellectual idea, it's a fact. And I felt it when you sang it, and I feel it when I talk about it. And my pure goal in life is to take it everywhere I go. And I go to some pretty crazy places in the world. And I want to be willing to take it to all of those crazy places. And I want to be willing to take it to Ghana and India. I want to be willing to take it everywhere. Because the science of mind is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful philosophy. but it's not the only philosophy. It's a beautiful teaching. But I feel the presence of Ernest Holmes speaking as he spoke so much, so often. I feel this energy of, all right, I said what I said. Now, are you going to take this and move on or not? Are you going to move this on or not? Are you going to take this and take it to the next level or not? You don't have to be sick to get better. So get better. Get better and better and better and better, and be willing to be stoned to death if you have to be. Be willing to be obnoxious if you need to be, but be willing to speak the truth. So I'm telling you, the truth of you here today is that you are standing on holy ground because you are the holy ground. Take that with you everywhere you go this week and see if you can change the way your life transpires. See what you can accomplish by taking holy ground everywhere you go. See what's met. See what you meet. See how it meets you. See how everything changes when you know who you are. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you. So I invite you to take a deep breath. This is our time of conscious giving. I invite you to hold your contribution here this morning. And you know, on Sundays I say contribute, invest, whatever word you want to use, but I'm going to use contribution today. Because one of the things that's important is to ask ourselves, what do I contribute to life? What do I contribute to the world around me? What do I contribute to my own life? Last week we talked about what do I say yes to. I've thought a lot about that this week. And I've only said yes to what I want to say yes to. So I want to ask myself, what do I contribute? So ask yourself that. And recognize as you hold in your hand your contribution this morning, that it is energy. It is holy ground that you're holding. So know that as you consciously place it in the basket this morning. So let's know this together, shall we? Divine love consecrates my gift. It goes forth to heal, prosper, and bless. It is evidence of my conviction that God is the source and substance of my supply. I joyously contribute to the vision of this spiritual center, knowing that it returns to me multiplied abundantly.